Yeah,
So what else is going on? How's your area? Have you been busy with the season opening up?
yeah, it's been steady so far.
Yeah,
It's been steady, a couple cases here and there and whatnot. So
we miss not seeing you down here for Patrol Pro.
yeah, yeah, this year was just too crazy with the baby. I was on baby leave.
Oh
I was on intermittent baby leave, and
yeah.
she went back to work. He started daycare, so
Yeah. Hey Tanner.
Good morning.
Chief. Chief Covey, we're at 6 of 7 right now.
Okay. Andrew, actually, now that you mention that, there's a little bit of a discrepancy in membership on your website. Andrew Bent is not listed. He won't make it today. Likely, he had emailed me. And then on the emails you and I have been sharing, Thomas Stange, I don't know.
Yep.
He is not on the emails we've been sharing, so it's likely he doesn't even know about this today.
Okay.
But we have quorum anyway, so.
Okay.
Andrew's on scheduled day off. He does send his regrets.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So you good to go?
Thanks, Sheriff. All set. Recording should be going. We're good.
Oh, Okay, good morning. I'll call this meeting to order. It's 11 a.m. There's a lot of new faces here. So before we get started, the TAC, according to my notes, hasn't met since March 18th of 2022. I don't know that there's many of us left from back then. So just go around the room. There's a bunch of faces I don't recognize. I recognize your names, but I'm Jason Covey. I've been the chair of the TAC for a few years, on the TAC for, I don't know, pre-COVID anyway. I don't know how long it's been, but I'm the chief in Middlebury. So Jeremy.
Good morning. Senior Warden Jeremy Schmid, covered the Underhill District up in the Northwest Supervisory District.
I guess that Derek.
Hello, Derek Tinkin, Chief Winhall PD. I also instruct the impaired driving courses at the Academy.
Tanner.
Yeah, good morning. Tanner Palermo with Vermont Liquor and Lottery investigator, filling in for Skylar Janest during his year of military leave.
Good to have you. Thank you. And who else? Sheriff Poulin.
Good morning, everyone. Mark Pullen, Washington County Sheriff in Vermont. This is my first round on the TAC. My Sergeant Andrew Bent has been on it for a few years. He's been on it, I forget in what role, but I was chosen with the short straw as the sheriff's representative. So, but I am excited to be here. I'm a big believer in training. I've been an instructor in about everything for a number of years. So thank you for putting up with me.
Thanks, Sheriff. Let's see. And Lieutenant Barone. I believe you're in here.
Yeah, right here. Brittany Barone with the State Police. I'm the lieutenant at OPD.
Did I miss any TAC members? There's others on the call. I'm just trying to cover TAC. I think we got all of us. Okay. All right. Well, with that, we also have members of the waiver committee on the call, correct? That's who I think we're meeting with today. Waiver committee, yes. So, Director, if you could brief us a little bit on this assignment. I emailed everybody very briefly as to what we would be doing, but if you can fill in the blanks for us, please.
I can, sir. Thank you very much. And welcome, everybody. Thank you for your participation and being willing to join us and hopefully help us move forward. So this meeting was really twofold, in my view. One, I don't have it printed in front of me, but there was an agenda. So the reason behind the joint meeting between the TAC and the waiver committee was for a couple of reasons. One is because our waiver process for folks that come here from out of jurisdiction is a really comprehensive and complicated process that requires a lot of work on Lindsay's part. Lindsay does all of the screening for folks that are coming from out of state on what we're required to do, which is make sure that if you're coming from another state, that your training either meets or exceeds what Vermont provides to you before we just give you certification. It's a complicated process. We're looking to see if we can somehow, between both of your committees, having some discussions, more or less formalize and standardize that process so that it takes ambiguity out of it. It makes it easy for somebody that's coming here from out of state to know, here's what I have to meet. Here's the basic necessities, and then some conversation about should we be looking in great detail and going down the rabbit hole for each and everything that somebody took for training out of state to see if it meets our requirements, or should we simply be accepting somebody's certification? If they came from an out of state and they've attended a full-time academy, should we just accept that with the exception of Vermont training that they need to have here? So that was, I think, number two on your agenda for the discussion. The first part, and it's beneficial for both of these committees to actually hear this conversation anyway, was really, it's again, a complicated process, but for me to get my hands wrapped around, one, what our process currently is, and two, what our statutory obligation and opportunities are that are out there for people that are doing level 2 work that have a very specific scope of practice, and whether we should be entertaining that they do level 3 work with a special certification. So for those of you that do not know, in detail what the scope of practice is for a level 2. It's laid out in statute. It says everything that a level 2 officer can do. And it's limited for the majority of it, broadly speaking, it's misdemeanor crimes. They can't do felony crimes because they haven't attended a full-time certification course. However, in statute, there is a carve-out that says, in addition to the scope of practice that's permitted under the subdivision, a level 2 law enforcement officer may also practice in additional areas approved in writing by the council based on a special certification or training approved by the council. And so as a result of that being out there, I've had a request on different occasions, but a very specific request based on that statutory language that a level 2 officer receives additional certification and sanction by the council to work in an SIU and investigate felony sexual abuse crimes. So my immediate answer to that is no, and no, and no. That shouldn't happen, right? You don't have that level of certification. And yet, at the same time, the person who is asking for this certification does have some very specific additional training in that area, is probably likely a good candidate if there was a process to give somebody additional certification. And in addition to that, has submitted letters of recommendation. I don't know if your committee chair Covey have seen all those documentations that came with it, but so I'm not minimizing the potential of the person that might be able to be a good candidate and fill that role. But the real question is, should they? And separately from this group, we've had an alternate path working group that's been working nonstop trying to come up with the statutory language that requires that there's an alternate path to full-time certification outside of the academy. And that alternate path, that group has made their recommendations at the last council meeting. They provided us a report. And what I just think is important for this group to note is that in that report, they made 2 recommendations. And one of those is that for officers who hold a level 2 certification to go to a level 3, there would need to be additional factors in place, a process for them to do that. But that group also noted that while there's a statutory requirement that allows us to do that, that they do not recommend the piecemeal method of getting additional trainings, but they do see a value in getting a process that moves somebody from a level 2 to a level 3 certification. So with that recommendation in mind and with their thought process on we shouldn't be doing little chunks for people that want to have individual added certifications, I really thought that this would be good conversation for the TAC committee, because the TAC committee has covered this ground before in their level 2 report out that they gave to the council, and there were some very specific recommendations. And I appreciate the work that the TAC committee did because it was based on sound conversations and reasoning, and I think it was well received by the council when they presented that. So I guess I'm really looking to the TAC committee for another sounding board and for potentially a recommendation that either disagrees with what the alternate path work group came up with as a recommendation or concurs with that recommendation. And should our recommendation from the TAC be to us that we go back and we change that piece in legislation that removes that additional certification? Big concepts, right? So and we shouldn't look at it in an isolated case of, well, we had a request from an outside agency that wants to do sexual assault investigations there. What about death scene certification? It's something that everybody needs to have within their agencies, but it's not a certification course. Should it be, right? That could be an avenue that meets that statutory language that currently exists. We could create a death scene certification. We could create a chiefs of police certification. You can't be a chief until you've attended chiefs training. Like so many options that are out there. So I'm going to stop there because it's a lot of material. And I just kind of wanted to, I think, back to the chair and throw it back to you for like, where do you see the conversation going? Do you think like we should look at this first from the initial request that we had, or the bigger, broader discussion on what's your committee's feeling on that overall process?
Thank you. Before I answer that question, has this carve out ever been used to give someone expanded scope?
It was until we incorporated DUI into the full-time class, because you used to have to come back as a level 2. If your agency wanted you to be able to investigate DUIs, you would come back and get that special certification, even though DUI is not a certification course, right? It's a training course. You're certified in the use of a data master. So that's the only certification piece. But it has been, until such time as we enveloped that into the full-time basic class, level 2 officers did receive certification through the data master to do a DUI investigation, because that was not included in the scope of practice initially.
Okay. My sense is I agree with the alternative path recommendation that this not be considered on a case-by-case basis. I think that opens a can of worms and is logistically nightmarish to think about, because as I went through, I reviewed the controlling statute here this morning. For example, level 2 scope of practice includes domestic assault, misdemeanor domestic assault, but it doesn't include any felony domestic assault, a second degree aggravated, which can be as simple as, does this person have a previous conviction? So while I recognize that in this case, the person seeking approval has a pretty impressive resume, I don't think that's the point. I think the point is this could create a real challenge, not only for relevant committees, but also for academy staff. I feel like there is a process in place, and maybe the place to focus the process is on this level 2 to level 3 path. That's the only way to consider expanded scope. I get what the intent was, but I don't think it is well thought out and could be really problematic today. Those are my initial thoughts. Anyone else? Sheriff Pullen.
So looking at the group here, I don't know how many of you have level 2s. Can I ask that quick question? How familiar is this group with the level 2 program? Derek, do you have any? That's my guess. We're the only 2 that would have them.
Yeah, I have one level 2 certified officer working.
Right. So I've always looked at the level 2 as kind of the gateway to law enforcement. Is this going to be a good fit with you? If you want to do big boy cop work, you have to go to the big boy cop school. So I completely agree that level 3 should be the baseline for beginning into special teams. You got to walk before you can run. That's just the way it is. So short version, I agree completely, Jason. Thank you for making it much more eloquent than I could.
I'm struggling a little bit, just because the qualifications in this particular case, but I think we need to remove ourselves from this particular case. When the director and I first spoke about this coming up on the radar, the analogy I thought of was a medical one. For example, you could have a physician's assistant that has worked alongside a surgeon for many, many years and is perfectly capable, but until they become an MD, they can't perform surgery. You can have a paralegal that's worked in a law office for 30 years and know more than the attorneys that are there. They just can't practice law because they haven't taken the next step. So what makes our profession different than any other, that we will piecemeal this approach? It's a standardization. It is about professionalism. And it's also not, for me, just about what's on your resume. The whole point, we go to the level 3 class, it's a shared experience and it's a holistic training environment. It's not just surgical application of this particular skill set. You're learning everything, because everything fits together just to work in an SIU, for example. That's going to encompass other things that you may not have learned yet. You weren't in this immersive training environment. So that's where I come from this. Appreciate your thoughts, Sheriff. Anyone else? Well, I don't have the Staples button, but that was easy. So Director, where do we go from here? Because if this is our take on this, then we don't need to review the individual application. I guess we're just making a recommendation that we not consider that exception that exists in statute now.
Well, that was a
That'd
quick
be our recommendation.
that was a quick and clear decision and recommendation. I think for me, I definitely want to have this conversation with the larger council, right? Because it's in statute. We're very mindful of if something is in statute, what was the intent of it getting there, and then changing it, what's the intent of changing it, and should we be changing it, and who are we impacting by doing that? All those big picture items. And this was like, for me, this was the first step, right? Like, how does the TAC committee feel about that, knowing that there's been an alternate path work group that's been meeting, that they've made a recommendation that the council has accepted, and their recommendation was, if we're going to focus with our limited resources that we have here on making more people more accessible in the profession, it should be that focus on finding a pathway from a level 2 certification to a level 3 certification. What does that look like, as opposed to looking at these chunks that are available? And so my first step was to come back to you and your group and to see if your group felt the same way. And if so, then I didn't want to represent something that we may have gotten for feedback from the TAC committee without having met with your group first and seeing what the consensus was there. But it's definitely going to be an agenda item for a council meeting. So my hope is that those that are not on the council attend council meetings regularly, because these are big topics that come up and they impact us here at the academy and what we're able to do, and without resources and with limited resources. So adding more things to the plate is sometimes taking a step backwards from my perspective. So I appreciate that consensus. And again, I would encourage those of you that maybe haven't had enough time to think about it or might think a little bit differently, come to a council meeting and voice your opinion, because that's where it matters. I got 24 bosses that oversee me. So it's important that, we have that conversation. So thank you, Chair. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So that's assignment number 1. So assignment number 2.
Chair, can I interrupt? Did we make a
Yes,
formal
please.
recommendation? Is that something we need to vote out?
Valid question.
I don't necessarily need it myself. If the TAC committee wants to provide like a written recommendation following this meeting, I'm happy to use that when we go to a council meeting, but I can certainly, mark the date and time that we had this conversation, and people can go back and review, the meeting itself. But it was really just for getting, the mindset of the TAC committee as well.
I'm happy with that, Director, based on the head nods and lack of protest. It seems like we achieved consensus from the moment you stopped talking. So I think there's nothing further to articulate. The TAC supports the alternative path as the proper remedy here.
Well, thank you for that. And I think moving on to your second agenda item, I think is probably best framed by Lindsay, who does all of this work and can give you some of the struggles that she faces and the very specific requests that she gets as well. So Lindsay, if you don't mind, I know I didn't talk to you about that ahead of time, but
No worries.
I know you'll do it well.
No worries. Hello, everybody. Lindsay, who I haven't met in person. I think Justin and Aaron are on here, Mark as well, and Travis. Yay! Almost the whole waiver subcommittee are also here. So if you have anything to chime in, feel free. So through the process of the waiver subcommittee, some things that come up. Largely, there is no national standard for police certification. So when we're looking at a waiver packet, largely we're looking at titles of courses And then anything we get regarding FTO packets, we review resumes. So we do have a review process that can be pretty lengthy, but with the change of rule in 24, there was a changeover that made it more flexible, which in one way is really good because we can evaluate one-on-one every packet that we get. And then in another way, not as good because there's no baseline standard. So we get a lot of like variables that come into play. So the main point of this process, I guess, once they get through that initial part, which we're still working on figuring out a way to make it more standardized, they get a pretty long prescription, just because a lot of that revolves around the state mandates, federal mandates, and then anything that we think might be missing within the initial training that they have or follow-up training that they have. So one of the questions for TAC and waiver to discuss, I think, is that standardized prescription, the piece of the prescription that everybody gets regardless of what training you have. What does a Vermont law enforcement officer have to know? And then it goes even further from that point. So entry requirements, are there any entry requirements that we have for basic training that perhaps a waiver candidate does not have to do? And then from there, do we want to require FTO period? There is no FTO for level 3, but do you want an FTO period required for an OJ? Sorry, which is a waiver. And then the other piece of it also is once it comes to fulfilling the prescription, as we all know how the academy is resourced, we try to make things work the best we can, but we're trying to find a way to make different pieces more efficient. And in that, we'd like to develop either some sort of waiver school or online components, test out components, but knowing what those components should be would be a big one. And then knowing how to fulfill those components. Do we want any skills-based, test-based, any of those? And then they're given, after, so right now, after they get the law package and a couple other components, they're given a provisional certification. So the other question is, what does that mean for an OOJ? Is it the same as a level 2 provisional, or is it the same, or is it its own thing? So when they're under provisional status, what does that mean? What are they able to do? So that was a lot of information thrown at you at once, but I was trying to keep it chunked into those areas. So any questions, feel free.
Where
Could
to
I
start?
Could I
Holy
add to
cow.
that just a little bit for your flavor, just so that you have some other information that goes along with that? So in some cases, we've had someone from an out of state as an agency had come to Vermont. They've gotten a provisional status, which means that right now, it means that they have to work with a full-time certified officer so that they don't make any mistakes or overstep their bounds right now. In some cases, we've had some chiefs that don't agree with that or are in situations where they don't have the staffing, and we've heard anecdotally that they've done things that they should not have done on a provisional status. So there's that mindset that then create an Act 56 violation for somebody that's not doing. And so like, you want to be able to think big picture, right? Like, we want to make this process simpler for folks to get into the profession. We want to be able to take somebody that's already at a chief level or a sheriff level from out of state and say, they've been to a full-time academy, they're simply coming to Vermont. How do we make that process simpler? But at the same time, safeguard the process that we have to make sure that they get the Vermont specific learning that they have to get. And then how is that process done without us having to pull instructors from all these other places and making a special class for 1 or 2 people? Can we do some of that training online? Is there a simpler way to do what we're doing? So Lindsay did give you a lot. I just wanted to kind of highlight the basic things of what we're trying to accomplish initially.
Okay. So this sounds like a lot of work for that committee, that you receive this packet and you have to review, because what Vermont calls report writing, for example, that a different state might call something else, and you're now comparing to see if it fits our program.
Correct. Previous rule used to state that there was a minimum, so their academy had to be a minimum number of hours or equivalent to hours. So we didn't get into really that depth of process and looking at what they had or didn't have because it wasn't part of the process. Now it's much more flexible, which as I said, in one way is very good, and then in another way, not as good. But yes, that is difficult.
So I guess are you ever receiving packets where there are components that don't meet Vermont standards?
So sometimes there'll be people either. So again, previous rule, you had to have a specific time on the road. That's not necessarily a component now. So sometimes you could balance between here was their initial training, but since they got that initial training, they've done the following annual training, they've been on the road for this long, they have experience in this area. So you could take all those components together and say they're suited to come into the profession in Vermont. However, they're going to need the additional information that Vermont requires. So each of those packets is looked at individually. We don't get a lot of waiver candidates, but we are getting more. So the process itself to have some sort of standardization doesn't, the flexibility is appreciated, but some element where maybe identifying specific areas, and Erin, feel free to jump in. She had some good ideas just around, a battery of tests, or Mark also mentioned that battery of tests, something skills-based, something test-based, something that they have the academic portion they have to attend. So trying to build out a component that would make sure that whatever previous training they've had could transfer over in a way that is suitable for Vermont law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, Lindsay has the hardest part of this. She's going through all these packets before they even get to our committee. What we talked about last week at our meeting was, is there a way to do competency testing? And if we do that, where do we do that in the process? Sheriff Anderson knows I fully disagree that we got rid of the minimum year requirement because it was a 3-year requirement, which is when most people start to feel like they know what they're doing on the road. And now we're looking at people that we had they were employed for a year and a half, off for 12 months, not doing the job at all. And so how do we determine what their competency is to come in, be successful, be safe, and have minimal liability to themselves and their agency? So it's pretty subjective right now. And so trying to go back and figure out how do we standardize this a little bit is a tall order right now. I think online training testing could be helpful, but I think a lot of competency or practical stuff is where we would see people being successful, or how we can then help them be successful in the future.
Do other states offer this lateral transfer, and how do they handle it?
So yes, I can provide the reciprocity manual that IATLS provides. Yeah, IATLS provides. So every state is different. How some states don't do it at all, and other states do. New Hampshire is probably like our closest model. I have additional information I can share with the TAC on that as well, and what their process is. But every state that does do it is a little bit different. Actually, I should say every post, because each academy within the post is also a little bit different. But I can send those both along for TAC.
Anyone have any initial thoughts? I don't think we're going to resolve this one as easily as the other one.
Lindsay, how many waiver requests do you get a year, roughly?
Probably maximum we get up to 10. I should say that actually get through the full process. We get them at various stages of agencies requesting what is the process like. And it is a big process for them to come over, just because there's a lot of background that they have to do before they ever decide whether or not they want to hire them. But then it's also a lot of legwork on our end to actually make sure they could actually come over in that way.
Okay. And Director, correct me if I'm wrong, can they sit in on our full-time basic courses when specific classes are being offered to the full-time basic class to get those, certifications and or training requirements?
We have done that in the past before. And one of the folks that I was hoping was going to be here today was Chief Polway from the Capitol Police, because he was one of those guys that just did everything that was asked of him, didn't complain, took it when our schedule permitted and when we were having a class that he could come in and do that with, exactly that process. But at the same time, he makes a good point. Like, it should be a simpler process for somebody that wants to come in and start work right away, and somebody who's capable. It also has to be kind of used as a screening tool, right? Like some that don't, where do they need additional help and what do we do for them?
We, just to jump on that as well, we have had chiefs in the past, part of the question around that provisional certification versus full certification. Some chiefs who are working in full capacity and don't have the ability to attend training in the same way that if they were sending someone. So they made their prescription, which generally would be a year that they would get. Some chiefs were 2 years trying to get the training, just because it is a lengthy prescription, and there's only some of the classes on the prescription are only offered twice a year within the basic training. And it's not like they can just register for the training. They have to go through a process here as well. So those are some of those additional components.
So one of the committee's ideas, if I understand correctly, is an ability to test out of some of the requirements. So you do the competency-based testing, and that would eliminate a training prescription. Is that accurate?
I think it would eliminate a portion of the training prescription, because they're still going to have to come in and take like the law package, the Vermont specific stuff. But, someone that has a use of force background, do we need to require them to take a 4-hour use of force training, or can they do a proficiency test out and then get the deadly force portion that is related to Vermont specific? So they are still going to have a prescription of coursework that they need to take. And as was mentioned, like the, I don't remember the proper title, but it's Jen Firpo's class, the 3-day sexual assault class, that's only offered during basic. So 2 times a year. So is that something that potentially could be done in an online course to make it more accessible? Domestic violence, is that something that potentially could be done in an online course to save Jen from meeting with one person or 2 people for 6 to 8 hours? So that's kind of what we're trying to hash out and see. Is there a bigger picture that we're missing? Is there something that's more feasible?
So is there a lack of real standardization nationwide as to, for example, let's use domestic violence. So domestic violence training, we have our standard in Vermont. That's not necessarily going to be the standard elsewhere. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I guess that's more of a rhetorical question than anything.
Part of that problem too with that, Jason, is that, yes, so Vermont has its own very specific and unique sections of law that are weaved into that, right? But so very often Lindsay will get somebody's transcript and it says domestic violence, but they won't be able to give you the course that they took or the curriculum that was attached to it. So you're not really comparing apples to apples. You're taking a title of a class and the hour number that it consisted of, and you're putting that to ours and saying, well, we know ours has very specific components that folks have to take, so we have to at least cover that area, So it's like, it's one of the probably worst defensible processes when you think about it, because some of them have had transcripts from 1978, 1982, and they're lucky if they can even get the baseline documentation that we need to even get accepted by the waiver subcommittee before we even try to send Lindsay digging into some state's archives to try to find, and that should be their responsibility to provide to us, but oftentimes they can't.
So I guess I would ask, as the folks who actually do this work, how would you like to see it change? What standardization makes the most sense?
I'm waiting for Sheriff Anderson to pipe up because he's my debate guy.
He's been very quiet.
I got thrown on the spot there.
You did.
So I guess what I would be pushing for is to come up with a big picture, not necessarily what we accomplish here as a joint committee. We accomplish accessibility to training. That could be through different mediums, but we've heard about online training. Some of these might need to be hybrid. We can talk about symmetric or asymmetric learning, but at the same time, we need to get access to, for specifically for that out of jurisdiction waivers, we need to get access to the training in a more efficient way. This has been a decades long complaint of people coming from other states saying, why is our process so cumbersome? And that has been a continuing theme as long as I've been doing this work, I think. So getting access to what I'll call just-in-time training, however we do that, I think would help. I also think, and this might be a legislative issue, there might be value. Usually we hear the problems with an agency head. Somebody comes in, they're technically a law enforcement officer, but primarily an administrative person. And so what authority or requirements do they have or need? I think there could be value for us to have certification light where a person's administering an agency versus going out and taking the sexual assault call. And so we could get a person into a certification program, less qualified, but they're not capable of necessarily doing primary active law enforcement work. And then they could work on these bigger certification things like going from, I'll call it the chief certification to the full-time level 3 certification. We can have processes for those. Some of these, I think we're really trying to address time and accessibility, and it's a dual direction issue. Sometimes it's the employer that has the problem with the accessibility. Sometimes it's the availability from the academy based on the limited resources we all are aware of. So how do we do the things to deliver people to the profession? I guess I'll pause there.
Does this at all go hand in hand with this alternative path idea? Is there any way to meld the two?
I think so, but with alternative path, I also think we are looking at a multi-year project, and so
Yeah,
there are things
okay.
that we can do now where they would dovetail together with that process. I do think it makes a lot of sense to try to simplify the systems and procedures around it, and some of it would be doing the same work for both initiatives. So why do it twice?
Mhm. So if I'm understanding, I'm hearing two main issues. One is standardizing the process, and the second is making the necessary training available to bring people up to speed. So you have two prongs here. Am I missing a third or fourth or fifth prong?
Go
Catalyst.
ahead, Ken.
Part of the third prong of this is going to be the iAtlas curriculum rewrite. And so one of the things that we've always struggled with out-of-state folks is making sure that the Vermont specific is included in its entirety so they're not missing anything. And that has in many cases delayed their ability to get through training. The DV, the CSI that have so much Vermont specific material contained therein makes it difficult or impossible for folks to just test out that might be in their states experts in either or both of those fields. I think the curriculum rewrite with iAtlas is going to boilerplate far more of that and make it far less Vermont specific. I don't know that for sure, but that's based on some of the rewrite I've seen so far, that's the feeling I get. So it may simplify some of that. And obviously, if iAtlas has already put together a Bible of how to compare state to state and look at some of that, that might be a help. That said, when we start talking about alternative path and we start talking about level 2, trying to same what's going to be the new iAtlas curriculum for level 3 with level 2 is going to be challenging. So I think Mark was right. I think one's going to be a longer lasting process. that we should maybe not consider right away, and looking at the path and the scope now, I think is wise. But just for the group to start thinking about that rewrite is going to impact everything we do.
So is this a conversation that's time is not well placed? Because is IATLS going to upend everything a year from now with the new curriculum? Or I mean, because this work still needs to happen. As you receive these packets, you have to deal with them.
Yeah, I don't think it should upend any of that.
Okay.
Just, and this is a training perspective only. I think any work that either of these two committees can do in tandem to help standardize this process and to help give a better sense of how do we move forward with testing that makes sense. How do we move forward? Should we create I think as Lenny said, a standardized process where we hold a waiver school once a year, every year at the same time, and agencies just plan for it and they know in advance. And this is what it's going to consist of. And this will give you your provisional cert, laying out what's going to happen after that. Following this provisional certification, yes, you can work in uniform, but you have to be in the presence of, and or all of the potential pitfalls an agency head or an out-of-state officer might fall into. That all of that process, I think, might be really helpful. I think Lindsay's probably a better arbiter of that, though.
To add on to that, I think I would say yes, the training portion I think is very important and definitely something to build out, but I think it could happen in sync with IATLS as it's moving forward, and then as we're building out those components we're doing with the other curriculums. But there are elements such as the director just said about that provisional status, what that means, any of those baseline entry requirements, or anything. It could end up being that everybody agrees it stays as it is until something happens, but just knowing the pros and cons of where things are, and trying to be flexible with knowing that agencies need people, and sometimes there's candidates that are well suited. Just it gets difficult trying to get them through in a timely manner if they don't have the resources.
Tanner.
Yeah, thank you. I guess question for Lindsay or the committee, because I'm kind of new to all of this, but is the waiver process the same for a 2-year patrol officer coming to work the road versus a 25-year chief coming to more of like an administrative capability? Is it the same waiver process?
Generally, it's the same. Sometimes the prescription elements won't be, depending what they supply for documentation, but the process itself is the same.
Okay. I was just curious as to what the standard was if it was across the board, or if it depended on what level of in the agency they would be in, because I can see, some different conversations, like an FTO process would be more suited for an individual in entering a patrol capacity versus somebody into an administrative role. I guess that's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any comments, questions?
I think also if you can kind of think about from Lindsay's perspective earlier, she mentioned the mandatory things when somebody's coming in that you want to continue or you might want to waive. So remember, when somebody's coming, even though they're certified from another state, they're getting their basic certification in Vermont. So the same standards apply, right? They have to have a background. They have to have a polygraph if they've never had a polygraph before. Do you want the PT requirement to be part of a waiver, right? Like somebody that has passed it at one point in their state and is continually working now, are you going to require that from an out-of-state person coming to Vermont to get their out of jurisdiction recognized here? Is PT a part of that entry as well?
Okay, can we take this one by one? Actually, let's deal with that one first. that one feels easier to me to deal with. So you have to meet Vermont's basic entrance standards, which would be polygraph, background, PT, written test as of January 1st, and the physical examination and MMPI. Should all those be, out of those, what are currently required during the
All of
waiver
them.
process? All of them are. The PT test and written test as well are required of out-of-state waiver. I personally take no issue with
No.
that. Oh, sorry.
I don't think the PT test is required for them coming in, is it?
It's technically, they follow all the same standards that are required. Technically. We haven't been we have not been making them do the PT, same as we haven't been making them do the written entrance, just the MMPI and polygraph, but by rule, technically they fall under that same category.
Right, and the entrance test was waylaid for a while, but that is, the entrance test is for everybody January 1. So
Right.
it seems like you could make a reasonable argument an entrance test would be easily passed by somebody that's been doing the work. PT is a different question. Yes to the background, obviously, yes to the polygraph, obviously, but and I'm just throwing this out there as, somebody who's been in the business for a long time, should I have to go through the PT test again coming into another state?
My gut response, my immediate response is a standard is a standard is a standard. And the TAC has consistently been mentioning that level 2 should be subject to the same standard, and that this the level 2 basic certification process should include PT testing. So I feel, at least at the outset of this, that should be a required standard because it's the standard. For the same reason the polygraph is a standard. The written test is a standard. But I'm open to counter arguments. Colonel Steadman.
Thanks, Chief. I think this goes to the earlier question that was asked too, though, is, are you going to take someone who is coming to Vermont to be a chief of police who might have retired after a 25 or 30-year career and make them go through a PT test that's designed for the entrance to the police academy? Like, where's the rationale in that? I get the idea of a standard is a standard, and these are the sort of things that we as the group have sort of been wrestling with, is what is reasonable, and can you apply a basic flat line, this is the minimum? Because the one thing that I can say is there is consistently little conformity amongst the applicants, right? They all have different backgrounds, they have different experiences, different time on the road. All these things vary, and so I personally, I shouldn't say I have struggled with bright line rules, because you find someone who's been on the road or been working for 3 years, but they've been working in an administrative capacity. Well, what does that really do? So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with your point of saying a standard is a standard is standard. I'm just offering up that has been problematic, at least for me personally, with reviewing these things because of the varied nature with which the applicants are coming to the waiver process.
Understood. Thank you. Sheriff Anderson.
So echoing the Colonel's thoughts, one of the council standards is that the purposes of the testing is to accomplish the training. And so without a jurisdiction standard, if you will, or what training is necessary, is the PT test something that is going to aid or prevent them from completing their prescription? And I think oftentimes the answer is no, where I hear the argument on level 2 as an entrance standard for the initial basic training, level 2 or level 3. What we often see with the out of jurisdiction waiver process is that PT is not going to prevent or inhibit their ability to accomplish the training. So to that end, I think for these, the PT test does not make sense. And only were the profession to navigate to an annual requirement or some periodic requirement for continued PT testing could I see counter to it, even though I think there's a lot of reasons to advocate for PT programs, for standards with it. We do not currently have those in the state.
Thanks, Sheriff. Anyone? But the written test will be required. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So does that same argument apply to the written test?
I think it does, but I think it does mostly if you're looking at that administrative executive staff level. I think if you, and again, I think this is where it's hard to get hard and fast rules. If you have someone that's been on for a year and a half and has taken 12 months off, I think you should come in and do an entrance test. If you have 3 years on, been working consistent, FTO was good, maybe you don't have to take it, right? So I don't know how you do that, but I definitely think there's got to be levels of standards potentially, if we're going to look at standards. And so do we look at like an administrative option of PT is not required, entrance test not required? But, and so if we're looking at the entrance test as success, anyone who's coming in and taking a large prescription, did you have to come in and take that entrance test? Probably, to make sure that you're going to be successful, would be my thought.
Okay. What else? So where do we go from here? Because we're not going to resolve anything in this one meeting today, is the best course of action for the two committees to continue to meet to come up with a recommendation? Or is that what we're looking for, or we'll operate independently and then come together to compare notes?
I think if maybe Lindsay has the opportunity to set out what she talked about earlier, the different iterations of what the requirements are for applying for an out-of-state waiver, and maybe the committee can look at those independently, come up with thoughts and feelings, maybe not so much the feelings, more maybe just the thoughts, bring that back and then discuss it at that point.
I would prefer that, like a legislative process where the two houses, have their crossover bill, and then we can, that seems to make sense, and not to put more work on you, Lindsay, but to articulate in writing. I'm certainly not going to remember this whole conversation, and then we'll meet independently. The TAC will meet, and you do as well, and then we'll come together. I fully agree. This should be streamlined. This sounds terrible, what you have to do. It really does. Do we have a timeline here, Director?
No, not a timeline. It's one of the 30 things that we deal with during the day here that somebody complains about and we try to figure out an answer to. None of them simple, most of them complex, and most of them take time and resources, which time we have, resources, not so much.
Understood. What are the big complaints?
What I hear very often is the timeliness of being able to get somebody certified so that they can be working, and our lack of ability to provide the training that they need to get that training prescription done in a quicker method. And as you all know, that relies on, volunteer instructors or one of the 2 full-time classes that go through, or if there's a level 2 classes going through that they can sit in on and take that component. It's just very piecemeal and broken up and not systematic.
Okay, thank you. Sheriff Anderson?
Just summarizing what I think your question was, is what are we doing next? I think, at least just from my perspective, there's value that our committees have an awareness of what our committees are working on, because this is one of those drive the car as we're building it type problems. So if you're going to put mirrors on the car, then we shouldn't worry about that. But when we added that 5th tire to the car, you might say that that's dumb. And well, we spent some extra work on the 5th tire. So really, I think this is one of those things where I don't know that I come into it with a specific ask. I'm sure the academy staff has a better formulation of what that looks like. But are there ways we can accomplish the solutions to the problems? Because all of these problems that we're talking about have been around my entire career. They're not new. They're not novel. The solutions may be, but I think that's where there's value in future work of our joint committees.
Agreed. Thank you. Sheriff, cool.
Mark and I were texting a little bit, and I said the same thing. The minute I started, I heard these conversations 21 years ago. We're never going to make everyone happy. And I think that's been one of the big sticking points. We have hundreds of academies we theoretically could get people from. I think the model going forward is we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. There's just too many variables are here. So it's not going to be perfect for every situation. But I think if we get 51%, we're still better placed than we are right now. So that's going to be my kind of guiding going forward, if that makes sense.
Sure does. I guess final question I have, academy staff, how realistic is it that you could set up an online learning platform?
The learning
You identify,
platform.
yeah. So say there are these consistent classes that you're not able to offer, at a moment's notice. Could there be certain classes that are developed in a online deliverable that's on demand, asynchronous, so it's available maybe on demand, that would satisfy requirements? Would you be able to do that if that was one of the potential solutions here? I'm not saying it is, but
I'm looking at Ken look down and not face the screen anymore. That's where he tells me through my mind to shut up, right? So literally, could we do it? Yes, we could. The platform is easy enough to figure that out. It's the creating the content, getting the instructor to make sure that we're documenting the learning objectives and that they've been met, and so that we can honestly straight face that somebody has received and been delivered that content. Where it's problematic is finding the time in our staff schedules to create that in addition to what they do. But on top of that, then it's the skill-based things that really require hands-on and people being here to do. That's the other problem to that.
okay. Thank you.
Was I
Any
close,
other-
Ken?
That was great. Yeah, we constantly, and Sheriff Pullen and Sheriff Henderson are absolutely right. This is not a new thing. We've been fighting with this for years and years and years, in part because we have a lack of ability to be able to put together a training program online or as an online deliverable. Again, that asynchronous opportunity that is professional. And that is something that we all, as a committee and the council and everybody else, can be proud of and say, absolutely, this meets all the learning requirements of criminal law as it pertains to the state of Vermont. We have the people, we have the willingness, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, and frequently to try to now partner with PEG TV, who has been great, and I think you're going to see more content from us going through them. I think that's a possibility. I think Lindsay's work with ACADIS and now the LMS portion of that, there's going to be more opportunity. Yes, we'll get there. Unfortunately, it's pushing the wheel uphill sometimes. Is what it is.
Sheriff Anderson.
I forget what committee it was part of, but it was one of the groups, whether it was alternative pathways or the level 2 curriculum review, something like that. 1 hour of online curriculum development takes about 40 hours of labor behind the scenes. This is not, it's an entirely different model developing online model than an in-person class. And there's ways to do it well, there's ways to do it poorly. And so even talking with like CCV or other colleges, they start to talk about some of the resources they throw at doing these things. We don't have it.
Indeed. Any other final thoughts, questions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for accepting this challenge.
Our pleasure. So I guess, Lindsay, it's all on you. When you can capture some of this in writing, if you could share it, and then TAC members, I will send out another meeting invite. And once we have our assignment in front of us, we'll come up with a regular meeting schedule. Okay. So if no one has anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Sheriff Pullen. Second, anyone?
I'll second.
Seconded by Warden Schmidt. All in favor? Say aye or raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, folks.